Hey everyone, welcome to another Deck Tech by Delver Brews. So I'm off the 5-week Teamer Delver adventure that I just went on. If you haven't seen those deck techs, check them out. I think they're pretty cool. I got a lot of good feedback on them. If you're interested in playing Teamer Delver, I think that's a good place to start, at least in Modern. Today we're going to be looking at something else, something fresh, something I've been brewing. Today we're going to be looking at Sultai Tarmohawk, at least that's what I'm calling it. I think Tarmohawk sounds pretty cool. And I think for the next 3 weeks I'm going to be playing around with Nighthawk Scavenger, which is a creature that recently got printed in Zendikar Rising. Let's take a quick look at the core right now. Right there, Nighthawk Scavenger, 3 black and 1 colorless for a vampire rogue creature. Flying, Death Touch, Lifelink. Awesome so far. Nighthawk Scavenger's power is equal to 1 plus a number of card types among cards in your opponent's graveyards. So by default, it's a 1/3. Oftentimes, it's going to be a 2/3 or a 3/3 when it hits the battlefield. And realistically speaking, when I'm playing with it, it's anywhere between a 3/3 and a 5/3 when playing against most decks in Modern. And that's just fantastic, because having a 5/3 flying Death Touch Lifelink creature for 3 mana is just beautiful. It's just beautiful. The minute I saw this card, I was like, oh my god, it's Tarmogoyf's slightly weaker brother. And I fell in love with it, and I'm already deeply in love with Thieves Guild Enforcer. And I said, oh my god, there's synergy here. And I was like, you know, all the little sparks were blowing up in my head. I'm like, oh my god, I need to build more. I need to build with this card. And this is what I've come up with. Sultai Tarmohawk. Next week it'll be Jun, and the week after that it'll be Abzan. So just give you a bit of a heads up there. I guess that's a spoiler alert. But today we're looking at Sultai. So the core starts off with Nighthawk Scavenger. It's honestly a great card. It's going to gain you life, which is actually very relevant because, you know, our mana base is kind of painful. That's just how it is in Modern. So that life gain is going to be very important. It's going to allow you to be a bit more risky in your plays as well, because you know on the upswing you're going to be able to gain 3 to 5 life you know, when Nighthawk Scavenger does go sideways. And you're going to be seeing in the matches I'm going to be posting up today that, you know, it comes in handy in those scenarios quite often. And it's also Death Touch, so sometimes you need to deal with a big creature and Fatal Push doesn't do it. Death Touch will get you there, and it will also make your opponents think twice about attacking in. Because even if it's a 1/3, it still has Death Touch. It really doesn't matter. And it's going to make, you know, your opponent think twice about attacking with Uro or anything else, because they know you're definitely going to block and do that trade. Up next, Thieves Guild Enforcer. When Thieves Guild Enforcer was printed, I mean, I tried to fit it. I mean, I couldn't fit it in my Teamer Rogues deck for obvious reasons, but I built an alternate version of Teamer Rogues that, you know, included black. I believe it was Sultai Rogues, and I did a deck tech on that a couple of months ago. And ever since then, every time I see a rogue card that I think is at least mildly playable in Modern, I think about Thieves Guild Enforcer and how those two cards can interact with each other. Here in this shell, Thieves Guild Enforcer is a beast as well. So you all know what Thieves Guild Enforcer does, of course. Flash, which can be relevant at times. When it enters the battlefield, or when another rogue enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent mills 2 cards. And as long as your opponent has 8 or more cards, kind of like Threshold here, your Thieves Guild Enforcer gets +2/+1, so it becomes a 3/2. Relevant, but not necessarily while you're playing this card, although 3/2 can be nice, you know, in the mid to late game. Really, it's that effect. So, you know, just look at Thieves Guild Enforcer in a vacuum here. When you play your first Thieves Guild Enforcer, your opponent mills 2. When you play your second Thieves Guild Enforcer, your opponent mills 4. And when you play your third Thieves Guild Enforcer, your opponent mills 6. I hope my math is right there. No, it's way more. Because you're going to get a trigger off the first Thieves Guild Enforcer. You're going to get a trigger off the second Thieves Guild Enforcer. Oh, yeah, so it's 6. Okay, my math is good. I didn't think ahead here, and if it is still wrong, please make fun of me in the comments section. So, obviously, you're milling your opponent for 2, filling up their graveyard, and that's only going to feed Nighthawk Scavenger even more. And, of course, Nighthawk Scavenger is a rogue as well, so when it enters the battlefield, it also triggers the ability, which can make it bigger than what you thought it would be when it was going to hit the battlefield, because you might have milled a new card type into your opponent's graveyard. So, I think these two cards actually play very well together. Thieves Guild Enforcer is a nice little card to play early on to start getting the milling going, and then Nighthawk Scavenger just kind of piles on from there. And of course you have Tarmogoyf. We all love Tarmogoyf. I know it's not played as much, and the 4 foil Tarmogoyfs that I have on my eBay channel have not sold in a long time, because I guess people don't want to buy foil Tarmogoyfs, but I don't care. It eventually will sell at some point, but Tarmogoyf is it's just the best of all the worlds when we're dealing with graveyards here. It gets bigger off of your opponent's graveyard, it gets bigger off of yours, so, you know, by definition, anything you do to make Nighthawk Scavenger get bigger is going to help Tarmogoyf, almost certainly. And almost always, anything you do to make Tarmogoyf bigger will help Nighthawk Scavenger get bigger, almost. At least when you're dealing with your opponent. So I think all of these cards work well together, and I've built 3 decks essentially, you know, abusing that as much as possible and having fun in the process. So let's move on to the other creatures in Sultai Tarmohawk. So the only other creature we're playing here is a 4 of Uro, and I think Uro really rounds it out in Sultai as well, because I feel in Sultai, as in most Sultai decks in Modern, when you're trying to play fair, Sultai kind of lacks the reach in a way to kind of finish off games. You know, it doesn't have Bolt or anything, or something as all-encompassing as Path to Exile to kind of really make headway against your opponents. So a lot of things are a lot of your removal and all that is very conditional, and there's no easy way to ping your opponent directly for damage. So Uro here really pulls its weight, really helps round out the deck if your core plan is failing, and that's the way I see it. And it helps you gain life, worst case, you know, gain 3 life and draw a card, worst case, and that's perfectly fine as well. But you're doing stuff that's filling up your graveyards, your opponent's graveyard, so Uro is going to be relevant either way, and I think it's a very good addition to this deck overall. But that's pretty much it for creatures. Let's move on to Permission. So Stubborn Denial is going to be a card that's going to be active pretty often here. So apart from Thieves Guild Enforcer, your Tarmogoyf, your Uro, and a lot of the times your Nighthawk Scavenger are going to trigger Ferocious. And that's important because Stubborn Denial becomes a 1 mana, you know, counter target non-creature spell, which is very powerful in Modern. It helps you win counter wars, it helps you counter cards you really don't want, you know, to resolve. And Stubborn Denial is just, for me, in a deck like this, it's kind of, you kind of can't play without it. That's just my opinion. Really, really good here, really solid card. Up next is Mana Leak. I'm playing only 2. That's mostly because of Drown on the Lock, which we'll get to in a second. So I'm playing 2 Mana Leaks. Again, I think this is fine here. Kind of a flex slot. You could play with it, around with it if you want, but I think 2 Mana Leaks are still good to have in this deck. I don't want to completely commit to Drown on the Lock, and I'll tell you why in a second. Force of Negation as well allows us to go all in even more oftentimes without keeping mana up for counters. We're not playing too many lands here. I believe we're playing 18, so you know, you're not, and that's the type of decks. That's the type of deck I like playing. I don't like playing decks that have 24, 25 lands. I find that to be a bit boring. So when you play decks that have a lot less lands, you have to be a lot more efficient with how you use your lands. And Force of Negation allows you to be a bit more careless because you can tap out and then be confident that you could probably counter a non-creature spell that you're worried about on your opponent's turn. So I play 4 of, but again, you can play with this number if you don't like playing pitch spells that much. And last but not least, Drown on the Lock. So in a deck where you're focusing on making your opponent's graveyard grow as much as possible, Drown on the Lock does make sense. Of course, the way it works is that you can counter a spell or you can destroy a creature where the CMC of that spell or creature is less than or equal to the amount of cards in your opponent's graveyard. So oftentimes great. Early game it sucks, and sometimes it just happens that somehow your opponent just avoids filling up their graveyard, or they have a delve spell and they empty out their graveyard, and then Drown on the Lock becomes a dud. And that's problematic. So I play 2 of. It's a counter / removal, but I kept it in the permissions package. Yeah, if I was going to drop a card between Mana Leak and Drown on the Lock, I'd probably drop Drown on the Lock. Just my opinion. Or I'd rather put like Assassin's Trophy in its place, because Assassin's Trophy at least will always destroy the permanent, and Drown on the Lock won't. So yeah, I played it here. It ended up working for me as a 2 of, but I feel like more is too risky, even in a deck like this. So that's just the bad experience I've had with it. So let's move on to committed removal here. So we have Fatal Push. We're playing 2 of, and I think 2 is enough. because we do have John Lock and we do have a 1 of Assassin's Trophy. I think as a as the core your main 60 removal package, I think this is more than enough for what you're doing. You do have a lot of permissions, so you're going to be countering a lot of dispels before they even become permanents. So this is why you don't have to go too heavy on Assassin's Trophy and Fatal Push. Plus you're milling your opponent, you're discarding your opponent. So, there's a lot of ways where cards are not going to be hitting the battlefield, so you don't have to worry too much. And if you are playing against, let's say an aggro deck or something, you can bring in more removal from the side. The Cantrips. So, Serum Visions, of course, we're playing blue. So, Serum Visions is going to be an auto-include and a 4 of. Why would you play less? Don't be dumb. And Thought Scour. Well, oftentimes when I'm playing Thought Scour, I'm targeting myself and milling myself. But here, no. You are almost certainly going to be targeting your opponent. You're going to have them mill 2 cards, and then you draw a card. This is very, very powerful. It helps you power up Thieves Guild Enforcer, but more importantly, it helps you power up your Tarmogoyf and your Nighthawk Scavenger. So, Thought Scour, a 4 of. I'm oftentimes apprehensive to play Thought Scour because I don't like milling myself, but here we're milling our opponents, so you almost certainly want to play 4. And then we get the discard. So I'm playing 3 Inquisition of Kozilek. I started off with 4, I went down to 2. At one point I had Thoughtseize in the main. Didn't really like any of those. I settled on 3. I think 3 is fine. You're already doing enough milling in other parts of the deck, and 3 Inquisitions of Kozilek are perfectly okay for your main 60. I have 2 Thoughtseize in the side, or I often do. And if you need more firepower against your opponent's hand, then you can bring it in the sideboard. But I think 3 of in the main is perfectly fine. And we get to the lands. So take a look. Those are our lands. What do you think? As you can see, I'm using a very familiar formula. So if you look at my teamer decks, you're often going to see that I have some number of shocks, some number of fetches, and some number of basics. That's just how it is. That's how it works. I don't need anything else. This formula has worked for me in so many decks, and in particular my Teamer Delver decks, or my Teamer decks in general. When I'm building other 3-color decks, I stick to this formula because it's often more than enough. I'm not a fan of utility lands or lands that do something special. If you have a certain condition, I want lands that do what they are supposed to do, which is produce mana and produce it when I want it to be produced. I don't want conditions, and this is what shocks and basics allow me to do, and fetches allow me to get those shocks and basics. So if you want the best land mana available to you, this is the formula that you're going to pick to get that. This is the best formula you can have. Take my word for it. If you disagree with me, I would love to hear what more you can do to make your mana base more consistent in Modern with the lands that we have available. So if you want the most consistent mana, this is the formula you should take. If you want your lands to do something more than just produce mana, then you can start looking into utility lands, or you can start looking into check lands, like Darkslick Shores as opposed to a Watery Grave, or swapping out 1 shock for something for a land like that. That's okay too. I do it in Jund. I'm playing one of those check lands, but it really depends on the formulation and how many lands you have. When you have 18 or less lands in your deck, this is almost certainly what I'm going for, because lands are already scarce. When you draw a land, you need it to do what you want it to do. I've said this so many times. Anyone that watches all my deck techs, you're probably telling me to shut up, because I essentially say the same thing all the time, but it's just true. I'm being consistent here. This is the mana that you want. So 4 Verdant Catacombs, 2 Misty Rainforest, 4 Polluted Delta. Your blue and your black are really important here. Blue green not so much, so that's why I only have 2 Misty Rainforests, but it doesn't really matter. These lands get you all the lands you need out of your deck. So all these fetches, get you all the other lands that you need. Then I have 2 of Watery Grave, 1 Breeding Pool, 1 Overgrown Tomb, and then 1 Island, 1 Forest, 2 Swamp. It's perfect. It's all I need. I have no problems with this. Very rare that I pitch a hand, into my opening hand, because the lands are weird colors. That's it for lands. So the sideboard. I have a Teamer sideboard deck tech. I have a Simic sideboard deck tech. I have an Izzet sideboard deck tech. Sideboard tech. I shouldn't be saying deck tech. I'm going to be coming out with a Gruul sideboard tech video this week, I believe. And then I'm getting onto Sultai and other black-related card combinations. So I don't have a sideboard tech yet for a Sultai deck. I will soon. That being said, you know, these are cards that I often use already. Engineer Explosives as my, you know, catch-all sweeper. I'm playing 3 colors, so Engineer Explosives becomes very interesting here if I want to target larger, you know, a more variety of cards, more variety of permanents. Surgical Extraction, especially in a deck that focuses on milling or discarding, Surgical Extraction, in my opinion, is better than Grafdigger's Cage. Usually Grafdigger's Cage is my go-to. In a deck like this, Surgical Extraction almost seems much better. I guess it's still going to be very meta dependent, but again, if you're running so many mill cards and so many discard cards, Surgical Extraction is really what you want to be doing. It's just my opinion. Thoughtseize, 2 of. You're going to bring it against combo decks mostly, or decks where you're not really worried about your own life total. Mostly that means combo decks, so that you can pick cards that are higher in CMC. Spreading Seas, 3 of. I can't run Blood Moon, unfortunately. I would if I could, but I can't. So Spreading Seas is my option here in terms of targeting lands. It allows me to also draw a card. Worst case, if it's discarded, it's an enchantment. Makes my Tarmogoyf bigger. So it's a win all around here, I think. It's not going to be as good as Blood Moon, but nothing really is. Veil of Summer, I'm still playing green. I don't see why I wouldn't play Veil of Summer here. Yeah, it's going to protect you from blue and black decks. You are a blue and black deck, but, you know, there are other blue and black decks out there. So Veil of Summer is really going to help you out here. It's a 3 of, almost certainly. And Sermon's Rejection, I'm still concerned about colorless spells, in particular Tron. So Sermon's Rejection comes in when I'm playing Tron to be kind of a hard counter for essentially everything they play. And last but not least, the matchup. So here I do a matchup analysis. Overall, for my time grinding with Sultai Tarmohawk, it's a fun deck. I don't think it's as powerful as my Jun Tarmohawk deck, which you'll be seeing next week, but it's still a very fun deck. It's very interactive because you are playing blue and there's permissions. There's a permission package here, and, you know, some of your lines of play are a lot more complex, and, you know, Sultai is going to make some of your matchups better, some of them worse. That's just how it is. So let's get to it. Combo. I think against combo decks, you're actually very well suited because of your permission package. So, you know, what Jun and Abzan can't do is counter spells. In Sultai you can, and against combo decks, that's almost always a good thing. Jun and the Lock, as bad as it may be, late game, it's going to counter Primeval Titan, which is going to be very important. And just your counter spells in general are going to be able to shut down most combo decks. So I think your combo matchup is actually pretty good here overall. Again, it really depends on your opening hand, of course, like in any Magic deck or any Magic game. But I think your combo matchup is pretty good. Aggro, it's 50-50 in my opinion. I would probably remove a lot of the permissions after game 1, whether you win or lose, and move on to maybe more removal or sweepers on the side. But you have Uro, you have Tarmogoyf, you have Nighthawk Scavenger. Those are all big creatures, and they have life. I mean, your Nighthawk Scavenger has lifelink and death touch as well. And that's going to put a pause on your aggro opponent most of the time because they're not sure what they want to lose. 3 bodies pretty big, so apart from Lightning Bolt, which will always kill Nighthawk Scavenger, you know, little creatures are not going to attack in until they can beat your Nighthawk. And even then, they're not really going to attack in because they don't necessarily want to die. So it's going to slow down your aggro opponent, and that's exactly what you want to do against an aggro opponent, because aggro opponents usually want to go in fast, and Nighthawk tells them, no, slow down, you're going to go my speed. So aggro matchups are at least 50-50 in my opinion. They could go either way, and that's just how it is. Sometimes your opponent's explosive. What are you going to do? You know, bring in more removal, and that's the best you can do. And if you're in a very aggro-heavy meta, play more fatal pushes or more removal that's available to you in black and green, or, you know, yeah, that's it. That's all the best I can say. Big mana decks. So I think you have a pretty good play against big mana here. You have your counters package that can deal with their planeswalkers, and your creatures aren't necessarily small either. So Uro is a 6/6. It's going to take on even a Reality Smasher, and your Tarmogoyf is going to get pretty big as well because you are milling here. You know, in Temur Delver, I'm not really milling. Here, you're milling your opponent. You're discarding cards from your opponent's hand. So Tarmogoyf is going to get pretty big, especially against big mana. You're going to, you know, get rid of artifacts. You're going to get rid of planeswalkers. Your Tarmogoyf is going to be big, and your Nighthawk Scavenger is going to be big too. You're going to see a 5/3, 6/3 Nighthawk Scavenger. That's scary. So, yeah, I mean, I think your big mana matchups are pretty good. Pretty good. I would bring in removal that's better than Fatal Push, obviously, here in these instances. You know, maybe play some Assassin's Trophies in your sideboard as well to be able to target, you know, any permanent. But I think overall your big mana matchup here is pretty good. Not Magic? Yeah, this becomes a bit of a problem here. So, Not Magic sucks in general, right? When you're playing against Not Magic, they're already filling up their graveyard, so in a way they're doing your job for you. But then, you know, milling your opponent, they don't really care. Like, you're helping them. So this is where Tarmohawk kind of folds, unfortunately. I didn't play a lot against Not Magic with this deck, but it's going to be tough. I'm just telling you, it's an uphill battle. Because when you're milling them, they're like, alright, thank you. That's, you know, one less judge I need to do. You know, that's just how it is. So you better hope that you start off with like 3 Nighthawk Scavengers in your hand, because that's really the only way you're going to win that game. I mean, Tarmogoyf is also nice. It's going to keep your opponent at bay, but if they're very explosive, there's not much you can do when turn 1 or turn 2 to have like 6 creatures on the battlefield. It's just not much you can do. It's going to be tough, but not impossible. It's just when you're playing against it, it's going to feel kind of futile when you're milling them. It's not the same effect. But luckily, they're not Magic is not everywhere. It's not taking over the meta, you know. Thank God, because I really, really hate that deck. Or that archetype in general. Next up, Control. So this is going to be interesting. You're attacking your opponent on many different levels, or 2 different levels, but that's a lot more than many decks. You're attacking your opponent at their graveyard, right, or at their library, I should say, because you're milling your opponent, not too heavily, but you're milling them. You're attacking your opponent on the ground or in the air with your creatures, and actually there's a third that I'm missing here, is you're attacking your opponent's hand. So your opponent is going to have to deal with all of this. They're gonna be countering you, they're gonna be controlling you, but there's only so much they can do. Milling is probably the weakest thing you could do against them, but it's not really the point, right? Because you're not a mill deck per se. But your opponent's gonna have to deal with your discard. If you have discard early, it's gonna be great. You're gonna be able to pick out those permission cards you don't want to have to deal with or you don't have answers to, but you also have permission of your own. So your control opponent is gonna have a field day dealing with you, and that's exactly what you want with control opponents. They're going to be like, okay, I'm going to counter this, but then they have a counter for my counter, and then, okay, like, and that's just going to set them back. So I think your control matchup is actually pretty good. You know, again, if control is a lot in your meta, there's a lot of artifacts you need to deal with. You know, Engineer Explosives is going to be great to take out the tokens that are generated from Batterskull, for example, and you can bring in more removal, like Assassin's Trophy, and Drown in the Lock is still a thing. It's going to be able to get rid of permanents, creatures at least. And it's going to be able to counter spells as well. So, yeah, I think your control matchup is not that bad here. You may have to tweak the deck a bit, but I think your control matchup is better than a lot of other decks that I play. Last but not least, mid-range. Yeah, mid-range, you're going to be grinding out. Tarmohawk, Sultai Tarmohawk is essentially a mid-range deck that has a permission package. That's just the way I view it. It's not a control deck, per se. I mean, I don't think any deck is a control deck when it's playing 18 lands. It's just my weird opinion. But yeah, I think you're a mid-range deck playing against another mid-range deck. If you're playing against Jund or, well, mostly Jund, that's mostly the type of mid-range you're going to be seeing in Modern. Yeah, you're on an even keel here. They have no blue, you have no red, so they're going to, at the end of the day, they're going to have some form of upper hand, but you have counters to their red spells, and that's always going to be good. So I think it's just going to be an attrition game. It's going to be back and forth. You might be up, they might be ahead, then you might fall behind. They might be falling behind, and they might catch up. It's just going to be a grind, and you may have to sculpt your sideboard accordingly if you come across those decks a lot. But I think mid-range you can deal with overall, and we have some powerful tools against them. And that's it for Sultai Tarmohawk. I'm really excited about this deck. I'm even more excited about Jund Tarmohawk next week, but this deck, I think, if you have the cards, give it a shot. I'm going to post up some matches today, as usual. I always post up at least 3. And you're going to see how this deck plays against different types of decks. And yeah, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. What do you think about Nighthawk Scavenger? I really love that card. I'm so happy that it exists. I really, really am. As a Tarmogoyf lover, as Tarmogoyf being in my top 2 creatures in Magic, other than Delver's Secrets. I mean, Nighthawk Scavenger is really going after my heart there. So let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your opinions and your comments and your suggestions. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you enjoy my content in general, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Facebook. I'm everywhere. I'm trying to keep everyone happy. Some people don't like Twitter, some people don't like Facebook, blah, blah, blah. So, follow me on everywhere so you don't miss anything. A big thank you to all my patrons as well. If you're interested in becoming a patron, check out the link in the description. I have some pretty cool tiers set up, and essentially in most of those tiers, you're guaranteed to get mythics and rares in your mailbox at the end of every year. And the longer you're a patron, the more you get. And there's also some, random major card giveaways there that are patron only. So I think that's really cool. So if that's your type of thing, and you want to help out the channel at the same time, please become a patron. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks, and have a good one.